Welcome to View Camera Techniques. This is a review of Lecture 1, first recorded at CCSF in fall 2016. We join the lecture already in progress. Let's talk about the basics. What is a camera? So when you get to the view camera, it's a unique type of camera. So what is a camera? How did we get to this point? It's basically, I'm going to see if I can make this go. Yeah, so I created this wonderful animation a few years ago. So camera obscura is the most basic form of a camera. It refers to the Latin or the Italian words for room and dark, so basically a darkened room. We're all in a camera obscura right now, the dark room. Okay, oops, sorry about that. I wanted it to go faster. It seems like it's going really slow. So the most rudimentary camera is a room like this, or a box, or something like that. And I see there's a problem with the video. Here we go. I'm going to try not to mess with it anymore because I think I'm messing it up. So you could create a camera yourself. And oftentimes students do like to do that when they're using 4x5 film, is create their own camera by making a box and putting a hole in it. These are how cameras were invented. Because when light reflects off of objects out in the world, this is exactly how it works in your camera. It's reflecting different colors of light, and some of that light is going to make it into your camera, or in this case, the camera obscura being the most rudimentary form of camera. So it happens with all of the different objects in the landscape, and all those little spots of light sort of combine together. They're not separate because you can't really separate a ray of light, but they all combine to create an image on the inside of your camera. It's exactly how our view cameras work. It's exactly how your digital camera works, except for on the back of those cameras there's a piece of film or a digital scanner or something like that to record the image. When that opening in the camera is really large, it's going to be kind of a bright image. When the opening in the camera is small, it's going to be kind of a dark image. You may not notice this effect when you're using a digital camera, or even if you're using most film cameras, you won't see the aperture changing, but that's what's happening inside the camera. With the view camera, you are going to see that. You're going to see it get dimmer or brighter. So that's the most basic type of camera there is, and that's exactly what the view camera is designed after. So just history of the view camera being invented. People knew that this effect was around as early as like 500 BCE. So they knew about the projection inside a darkened room, but they didn't have photography. They didn't actually have cameras. If you were inside a room that had the same effect going on, or you created this kind of room, you could just do this by blacking out all the windows and then just creating a little opening so that light from the window can come in, and you'll see a projection on the wall. If you have dark curtains, you could even try it, just kind of pull the curtains and then leave a little opening. I can see it at my house sometimes. Through the cracks, I'll see a projection on the ceiling of the street below. But this is what it looks like inside the camera, inside your view camera. So that's the most rudimentary camera. So we had a camera, but no photography at that time in history. And it wasn't until all the way in the 1800s that the camera obscura started to return, and artists started to experiment with using the camera obscura to get more accurate perspective. So 1500s and 1600s really is when they started to come back, but it was the 1800s when all of these people started to think that maybe you could get a picture without having to draw it. So without having to, I skipped ahead. 1800s, camera obscura returns. Artists start using it to get more accurate perspective, but they design new cameras that you can actually see from the outside with a viewing screen, with a mirror, a reflex mirror in this example. But then it was the 1800s when they started to think, hey, can we actually make a picture without having to sketch it on the viewing screen or to get inside a box? Maybe we can use chemicals to do it. And that's how the earliest cameras were invented. This is one of the earliest ones by Henry Fox Talbot. If you've taken the history class, you know who he is, one of the earliest inventors of photography. And so they started putting light-sensitive material, paper coated with chemicals inside these camera obscuras very rudimentary, and then, photography was invented through that very basic box camera. The cameras that we use in this class, this is what one of them looks like. The view camera, the rail camera, monorail camera, it's exactly the same type of design. It's just a darkened chamber with an opening to allow light to come in. So it works just like that rudimentary camera obscura. I know that I've gotten a little off track and maybe I'm confusing some people because I've gotten all mixed up in my mind. But the cameras that we use are wonderful because the technology is so basic. It's basically a box that can expand and close. It's a little chamber that can expand and close. And it has an opening to allow light in. And then there's a way to put the film in the back of it. So it's as simple as that. In fact, I have disassembled one of the cameras, and I'm going to show you all the parts separately so you can see how that works. Through this invention comes the Panda photographer, who is one of the heroes of this lesson. But all of these cameras work the same. It's all the same technology. So to demystify it, we're going to take apart one of the cameras, and we're going to look at all the parts separately. You would not do that with your digital camera, but fortunately, we can do that with the view camera. What about negatives? It sounds like everybody here has experienced negatives before, so I just wanted to mention what they are, like why is it backwards? Why are all the light things dark and the dark things light? That's just how negatives are. Light-sensitive material that we're using in this class gets darker with exposure to light. So film gets darker with exposure to light, so inside a camera obscura like this one, all of the dark areas, like his dark coat, are going to end up lighter, and all of the light areas are going to end up darker in the negative. And then when we print it, it gets reversed again. So that's how negatives work. We'll look at negatives again as we get to that point, but just for those of you who have not done film photography before, that's how it is. Unfortunately, a lot of times students get into this class and they've never taken film photography before, and so it's kind of like taking two classes at the same time, and it can be a little overwhelming, but I'll try to help you in that case. So exactly like camera obscura, modern film camera. So just covering the basics of what a camera is, what the view camera is. There's two things to consider. One is the camera type, and the other one is the camera format. Camera type always refers to the design of a camera. So we're using the view camera. There's other types of large format cameras, but like a field camera or a folding camera, but we're using a monorail camera, monorail view camera. The camera format refers to the size of the film that it takes. So we're using large format photography. Film formats are pretty self-explanatory: small, medium, large. There's also ultra large format. But small, medium, large, we're using large format photography, and the style of camera that we're going to use eventually is going to be the monorail view camera. So here's a sort of backwards order just to get you oriented. I know it's kind of weird because I'm thinking about many of you having taken film photography before, so some of this may be too much. Anyway, so small format photography, there's a lot of benefits to that. As you know, it's handheld usually. It's very easy to do street photography. It's very discreet. Medium format photography is a slightly larger film size, a little less discreet, a little less easy to do handheld work. Large format photography is where we're at. It is not easy to do handheld. It is not discreet. As you can see here in this picture, that's actually an 8x10 size camera because the film just gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So that's even larger than we're using. But it's not discreet. But why would you use something that's so cumbersome and large? Why would you? And you're all in this class because there's something you know about view camera, or maybe you just heard this was a good class. Okay, so what are the advantages then? Yes, large negative. What are the disadvantages? All right, let's start with one. we talked about already. It's heavy. View camera is heavy. It's cumbersome. It is, you're having to like carry this thing around. You can't just put it on your hip and then go walking down the street and make photographs as you go. It's slow. You have to take your time. So it's not the kind of camera that you want if you want to capture some action happening spontaneously. It's the kind of thing that you have to plan ahead. You have to take your time. It's expensive. Compared to other film formats like, a 35 millimeter roll of film gives you 36 exposures. You're only getting one piece of film, and so you're paying for each one separately. It's obvious. You're not going to be able to sneak up on someone and make a candid portrait, right? So they're going to see you coming if you're like carrying around this tripod. You're like, hold on, just let me set this up and take it out of the box, that kind of thing. Okay. But there are many advantages, and this is why you are here, I hope, is that, one, more information. So this is the larger negative part. More information. So comparing the size of a small format negative and a large format negative, this is only 4x5. These formats go up past that. So if we compare the size of the negatives, there's a lot more information being recorded. So it's like you have that 35 millimeter negative, and you have that another, and another, and another, and another, and another, and another. And the size of the film can record more information. It's like having a much larger digital file can have more detail and more information than a small size digital file. So more information, that's a huge advantage, because when you blow up your pictures, if you want to make a large print, they can be a lot more detailed. If you're making a small print, they're going to look infinitely more detailed. They're going to look amazing. So more information with the larger negative. It is also a disadvantage because it's more difficult to work with, but having each of those separate sheets of film allows you to develop each one individually. So if you're using a special processing technique, you can push one piece of film, you can pull the other piece of film, you can adjust your developing times, you can test out one picture at a time without having to expose 36 different exposures and do it all at once and wait. Just an example, here's some of the earliest large format photographs were actually made on these glass plates. It's an example of that. So that's ultra large format. So it's big, way more information. Some photographers you probably already know who use large format photography, Edward Weston, 8x10 size camera. So that's a negative that's as big as a piece of paper. Like, that's a lot of information. When you see a print from a large format negative, it kind of is a little bit mind-blowing because they're so richly detailed. It is possible to make a negative with a 4x5 piece of film and have it look really bad, but it has the capacity to look really good. Richard Avedon, you probably all heard of his work. He uses large format photography, also 8x10, and it allows him to make gigantic prints. So some of his prints are 6 foot high. I've seen some of his prints that were like, 10, 20 feet across. Huge prints without any degradation of the detail. So that is a really important thing. You'll also notice around his negatives, he prints the entire negative, even the little edges where the picture didn't go because the film holder kind of was covering that part. That's something that people like to do just to kind of show off a little bit. They're like, yep, this is large format photography. Here's the edges of my negative, and you can see. Okay. Other artists that you may be familiar with, Andrei Gursky. Large format photography allows you to have that immense amount of detail so you can make a very large print. This is actually on view at the SF MoMA right now, so if you want to see this in person, it's really impressive. This one is also on view. It's very impressive. So I recommend going there. By the way, I do have a SF MoMA membership, so if anybody wants to go but can't afford the $20, $25 that it costs to go there now, let me know. I'm happy to get you some tickets. Okay, so advantages, more information. Independently moving parts can be resituated. So all of the different parts on the view camera, oh, that looks really terrible, sorry. All the different parts on the view camera are interchangeable, the ones that we're using. So all of the front part comes off, the middle part comes off. It's all separate pieces that you can change out and reconfigure depending on your needs. So all of the same parts that you see here, this is actually a 4x5 to 8x10 camera. So using a reducing back, you can make it a smaller format. If you use the larger back, you can make it 8x10. If you use all these different parts, you can change it depending on what you need. And if you break a part, you can just replace that one part instead of the entire thing.
Is the bellows the same size for the 4x5 as for the 8x10?
No, it needs to be a little bit bigger for the 8x10. Okay, so more control over perspective and focus. This is one of the most valuable things about the view camera, is that you can actually control where the plane of focus happens in your picture. So you guys all know from taking your other photography classes that the plane of focus, that depth of field in front of the lens, is always in a parallel line to the film or to the back of the digital camera, right? It's always parallel. With the view camera, you can change the angle of the depth of field, to change the angle of the plane of focus to follow your subject. So here the photographer has caused everything from near to far to be in focus by tilting the plane of focus so that it meets the ground, so it kind of follows the ground instead of just one flat plane. It's very cool. You're going to learn how to do it in this class. Yes, yes. I'm going to reveal the chalkboard so I can draw it out a little bit more clearly. Okay. No, stop. Okay. Go up again. Okay. So normally with the camera, I'm going to draw a view camera, the bellows, the lens. Okay, so normally when you're focusing out into the world, maybe I'll draw it like this. Okay. So there's the fence in the front. When you're focusing with a regular camera, you can really only focus on one point, and then the depth of field is that range of focus in front and behind that's also in focus. And you all know that when you stop down the lens to a smaller f-stop, that range gets bigger. That's the only way that you can get things in focus with a normal camera, is by making that depth of field bigger. With the view camera, you can change how these different parts line up. You can tilt them, move them around, and you can actually cause this plane of focus, instead of being parallel, to be at an angle, so that something that's down here can also be focused as something up here.
So then, if he changed it to be like this, then top and bottom would be out.
It could be. It could be. It depends on the situation. So yeah, that can be something that happens, where something is out of focus here and here. I'm going to show you some controls to maximize that. So to do that, stop down, try to get as much as you can. Some subjects you won't be able to get everything in focus, but you can get a lot more with the view camera than you can with other types of cameras. We'll cover that in detail in the coming weeks, and you'll learn all about it. So the other advantage, you can make straight lines parallel. So instead of looking up at a tall building and having the top look kind of keystoned or small at the top, you see that perspective, you can actually use the adjustments on the camera to straighten it out so that all of those lines look like they're completely parallel.
Now, do we still have the hair lines on them so you can't straighten out the perspective?
There are some lines on the screen of the view camera, yeah. Here's another cool feature, sort of speaks to that other question about using the depth of field and changing where the plane of focus is. You can actually have the plane of focus cut through the subject in very odd and unusual ways. Like here, the photographer has caused the plane of focus to be very, very narrow, despite their being very far away from their subject. We'll get into more detail about that, but normally when you look at a faraway subject, these are not toys, these are actual real people. When you look at a faraway subject like that, normally it would not have that narrow focus like that. That's why it looks so small, is because we're not used to seeing the world that way. So that's kind of cool. Here's another example of that. Okay, so you have a lot more control over perspective and focus. Yes, a bunch more control over perspective and focus. And it's a professional's tool. So when you're using a camera like this, you get more respect when you're out photographing. People know when they see a guy with a giant camera, he's not just some person who's randomly snapping pictures. Hey, get out of here. This is a real photographer who's serious about their work. It's a professional's tool. In fact, in the earlier days of photography, even press photographers used large format photography. And you can imagine what that was like. This is a smaller type of large format camera. It's not a view camera. It's a field camera. It's a folding camera, folding press camera. But actual news reporters would use large format photography because it was considered a professional tool. Even when smaller formats of film came out, for a long time, those were not considered professional enough, so they would have to have this sheet film. You probably have heard of the photographer Ouija before, this sort of nutty character who would photograph crime scenes and all sorts of crazy mayhem. He was an interesting photographer. For commercial photographers, if you're thinking about doing commercial work, view camera is going to be an important part of that. A lot of the job offerings for people to do studio photography are going to require you have these skills for view camera because it allows you to photograph a product in a very specific way. It allows you to photograph architecture in a specific way, so it's a great professional tool. Ruth Bernhard is an interesting photographer both for her commercial work and for her studio work and her really elegant lighting. As a person you would enjoy looking up. Edward Weston again, of course, professional's tool. Okay, skipping ahead. Because it's a professional's tool, you can get access to places that you would not otherwise get access to. It's not some sort of rule, but when you ask somebody, can I take a picture of you, or take a picture of your property, or take a picture, or get inside some place that other people are not allowed to go in, when you have a tool like a view camera, they know you're a serious photographer, and they're much more likely to give you access to places that are restricted. So you're not just some student showing up and, with a digital camera snapping some pictures. You're a professional. Okay. Even now, you don't even have to tell them you're a student. You can just say, I am a photographer with my view camera. I'd like to get access to your mine. This is a quarry. Or you'd like to have access to those private roads. People love, everybody loves photography at this point, and people really enjoy seeing the product of their own representation. But when you have a camera like this, people get excited about it. They're much more likely to give you access. Okay, so Bruce Davidson, he's another photographer who I think is really interesting in terms of getting access. This is a middle-aged Caucasian photographer who went into these Harlem low-income projects. He brought his gigantic camera and started photographing. Had he been a photographer with a small format camera, he would have been met with a lot of hesitation, a lot of mistrust. But because he was using this big, gigantic, crazy camera, people were curious. They didn't think that he was trying to work for the police, or they didn't distrust him as much. So they got curious. So he went out on the street, started photographing, and people got curious. They said, what are you doing here? You're not supposed to be around here. And he's like, yeah, I'm making some pictures. You want to see? You want to see the back of my camera? You want to see how cool it is? And he started making photographs, and he started earning the trust of the people in the neighborhood, making photographs of them. And so he created this really interesting documentation of these neighborhoods, these housing projects, and people started to invite him into their homes, into their businesses, and he created this really wonderful product, this really wonderful series. It's definitely worth looking up, all with a large format camera. And it's because he had that large format camera that he got access and that people trusted him, whereas there was no way that he was going to get invitations into people's homes with a small format photography. Okay. Oof. I think they just turned off the heat at some point here. It's getting very chilly. Okay. Getting us ready for that. Well, we're going to go outside in a couple minutes, have a pretty fun activity for you, I hope. I hope I'm not droning on too long. Okay. So slow down. It's both a disadvantage and an advantage. It forces you to slow down. So it's a kind of a pain because it takes more time, but it allows you to concentrate on your work. It allows you this sort of peaceful experience in photography that's less like rapid fire. It just forces you to slow down. Linda Connor I bring up because she's a photographer who is really wonderful about using time in her work. She's a local photographer giant. Okay, so slow down. It could be literal too. Why not? You're already having your camera on a tripod. Why not actually literally slow down and have a slow exposure? Okay, okay, so those are the advantages. Anybody have any other ideas about advantages? I think we've covered most of them. Okay, so now, as promised, we have an activity, we're going to take a break, and then we're going to look at the view camera. We've already looked at some of the supplies, but that's what we'll do.
This marks the end of the view camera lecture portion. After this, the students built their own camera obscuras out of paper, and we disassembled one view camera and reassembled it in order to learn the different parts of the camera. If you'd like to continue to learn about the view camera, you can watch our future videos, or you can sign up for our class at City College of San Francisco. Until next time, this is the end.